and welcome to our Gem Pursuit. My name is Matthew Weldon and I'm joined in our mysterious and magical pursuit through the world of antique and vintage jewellery by my trusty co-host Alyce Ketcher. Hello Alyce.
Hi everybody.
This week we are continuing our breakdown of the Victorian era. If you listened to last week's episode, you will have heard all about the romantic era of this Victorian period. And today we are moving on to a time defined by technological developments, mourning and opulence. Alyce, would you like to tell me what we are talking about today?
We are venturing into the sumptuous and lavish grand period of the Victorian era, Matthew.
I really can't wait to get started on this one. Let's go. So the grand period, Alyce, obviously last time we talked about the romantic era. And again, this mini-series is to help people identify the jewellery that they might have from this time period. And obviously because the Victorian period is so long, it's really important to be able to segment it a little bit more than just the Victorian era. But the grand period, we're talking about 1860 to 1885. And I think the background and kind of what's going on in the world at this time is really important.
It's really hard for us to kind of comprehend the amount of changes that are happening in this span of time of Queen Victoria's life. Really, you know, this whole series that we're doing, this mini-series, follows her life. So there is other things that are going on in the world for sure. You know, like France is doing its own thing as well, and things are happening in the US, and, you know, all around the world, other things are happening as well. But we're focusing on her life and how it actually, the time in the United Kingdom itself and its kingdoms, what is actually happening and how it affects her life choices affect the world. So starting off the grand period, we're going into a period of mourning. So we started off with her, you know, kind of like her youthful years where she's flirty Victoria. She gets her husband and she's able to kind of really enjoy married life and motherhood. And then the most unexpected thing happens, which is the loss of her husband, Prince Albert, in 1961. And it is really a shock.
1861.
Oh, 1861, sorry. Yeah, 1961. That would have been a very long reign. But it was a shock. It was a huge shock to the whole family, but in particular to Victoria, who I believe never really recovered from this.
No, and as we spoke about the last time, there's just a sheer force of her personality. Like, she's one of the first real influencers, if you want to call it that. When she went into mourning, it just permeated out through the whole of society.
And also they really did work as a team. So Victoria relied heavily upon Albert for his counsel, and also she really valued his opinion, and together they were a force for good. In many cases, they were able to sort out social housing and figure out ways to kind of better the lives of their subjects. And also they were huge lovers of the arts, especially Albert. So Albert was fundamental in the creating of the great exhibition that happened in London in 1851. And, you know, obviously the Victoria and Albert Museum is also a part of their legacy and their love of the arts and the love of decorative arts in particular. So losing him, it was almost like the footing of the whole empire was now kind of in the balance due to his loss, especially because the stability of Victoria changed.
And as we're saying, that was 1861 and the Grand Period starts in 1860. So it really was the catalyst or the dividing moment, more or less. What fascinated me about what was going on at this time period as well is just the rate of technological change, which is still ongoing today, it's even faster today. So it's kind of like it kickstarted then, obviously, Industrial Revolution, even things like, okay, there was electricity from long before that, but the invention of the light bulb happened in this time period. So when we're talking about, how that's going to impact the jewellery, we can talk about that shortly, but like the type of light, not just for social gatherings, how people spent their time, indoors, outdoors, and also how the jewellery reacts with incandescent light. But that was a huge element.
For sure. We also think about it, we're looking at palaces that used to be completely lit by candlelight, which means that all of the porters, all of the servants that she had would have had to go around every single night, change the candles. And they also had specific tools that put the candles out that were made of silver. So they had like this little cap on them and they put the cap on top of the candle to put the lights out. Now, as we move
candle
into...
snuffer.
Yeah. But, those things are so otherworldly to us now because a candle now we use to kind of create ambiance and sometimes for an aroma, you can get aromatic candles. So this was really foreign to those who are living in that time period to think, okay, well, now I've got this very bright light. And if you ever try to sit in a room and read by candlelight, it's very dull in comparison to an electronic light bulb. So it's almost like, the old school would have held on to the old ways and the newer generations would have been embracing the technological advancements that was happening. There's also in the Industrial Revolution, we have like
just before we go on there, I have a very important piece of trivia about the light bulb that I think we need to talk about.
Okay.
How long do you think the first light bulb lasted? So when the moment you turn it on until it would like burn out?
I don't know, maybe like 3 seconds.
No, 14 and a half hours. So there was ones before that, but this was the first one that was deemed practical enough to actually like use it in mass production kind of thing. So yeah, 14 and a half hours. It was a carbonized filament of uncoated cotton thread. And that was October 1879 by Thomas Edison, of course. So super important for jewellery. So sorry, before we go back to the jewels.
No, that's perfect. I mean, this is the interesting thing about this period. Also, textiles changed quite a bit as well because the use of things like the sewing machine and also, mass production starts to take over because the mechanization of a lot of different things in the world starts to take place. Travel also becomes a lot easier. We have a lot of the railway that used to be just used for cargo or for the elite in society now start to be used for the masses. So people are able to now go to the seaside or go to other parts of the kingdom that they weren't able to go to originally. So the world starts to open up a little bit. And especially when we look at, the great exhibition that happened in London, that also spurs this kind of craving to know more about the outside world outside of the United Kingdom. So we see a lot of influences starting to take over with the travel as well.
I love the great expositions that happened in this time period and happened before. And obviously there's a big one in Dublin in 1855, I believe. So I just think it's such a shame that they don't seem to happen like that anymore, really. Like, and that's just a pity. But anyway,
but it's the exploration though as well, you know. So if you look at the Victorian period, even now within our shop, we have a lot of things that have to do with navigation that would have been from the Grand period, like. Occasionally we'll get in these Victorian compasses, which would have been, you know, again, from this part of the Victorian period where they're in gold and they would have been worn on your Albert chain next to your watch. And it kind of would have been a way to show that you were interested in navigation, interested in exploring and knowing more about the world. And then also the interest in archaeological digs also become a huge part of this particular period as well. So we see a lot of the aristocratic elite heading out to kind of uncover civilizations for themselves. Some of them do it, you know, through particular archaeological digs. Others go and visit the archaeological digs. So it's, you know, we're getting out, we're exploring, we're learning more. But in the underneath of this, all of this as well, is we have a huge amount of morning jewellery that's taking place as well. But this is kind of setting the scene of what we're looking at in terms of this particular span of time. We have three very distinctive things. The mourning that is happening of Prince Albert, the Industrial Revolution and the use of travel, and ancient revivals.
So much going on in this time period, and it's going to have a massive impact on the jewellery for the different styles and the different ways that jewellery is actually created, partially and in no small part due to the technological advances. So when we're looking at the actual jewellery and what you're going to see in this time period, I think it's important to remember a couple of things that really are going to define it. So as we talked about at the start, the morning jewellery. And I think it's the first one we need to deal with because it was the catalyst for this time period. Morning jewellery, of course, for anyone who knows anything about it, it's going to be quite dark in nature. So it's going to be black, usually either it could be black enamelled, it can be set with black gemstones such as jet or onyx, which could be carved or could actually form the entire piece. Which actually we've had a couple of jet suites before, which are really interesting. So this was a big change from the jewellery before Albert's death, which would have been a lot more colourful, a lot more bright, a lot more fun. But the morning pieces, you'll really start to see a lot of them being made from about 1860 onwards, although they do exist before it.
Yes, morning jewellery for sure existed during the Romanticism era. We move on, though, from the flowers and the botany and the romanticism in morning jewellery when Albert dies. So Victoria kind of like is in shock. She's in major, major, major shock. And I don't think she handles it very well. She kind of doesn't know what to do with herself. The very first pieces that she commissions jewellery for herself are pendants from Garrard's Jewellers in 1861, and they are morning pieces, morning pendants of Albert. Now, before this, you know, she had given Albert a lover's eye, which we've spoken about in other episodes on Gem Pursuit. They were gifting jewelry to each other all the time, but in particular, Albert was the champion of all champions at giving jewelry to his wife, designing it. He enjoyed it immensely. But upon his death, she thought it was really important to keep him with her always. So she commissioned these particular pieces of Albert in 1861. Now, it's really important to mention that she went really crazy on the morning, right? Like, there's a mourning period, yes, And usually the mourning period lasts a certain amount of time. And then you remove the mourning outfits, you remove the blacks that you wear, and you then start living your life again. Victoria refused to do this. Even during her Jubilee celebrations, where they said, please remove the mourning bonnet that you're wearing so that you can wear something a little bit more opulent, something that shows off your splendor and your majesty, she refused to. The black bonnet never left. So she was very, very much in mourning for the rest of her life.
I find it amazing that she never really got over it. But the jewellery overall, it had a slightly more romantic tone of remembrance than the kind of a very somber one from before that. So it's a tricky one, you know, if you're looking at your jewellery at home, is it kind of romantic Victorian or grand period? There's a slight difference there. It is a slightly more romantic tone from 1860 onward rather than a very somber one before, which would be just specifically to the mourning jewellery. Oh, and again, as you said, so materials you'd want to be looking for: black jet, onyx, enamel, whippy jet, which is 180-year-old, million-year-old fossilized wood, basically, which actually can be found off the Yorkshire coast, which is
in Whitby.
In Whitby, yes. I actually know. This is when you're learning about antique jewellery, you know, there's always something new to learn. I thought for years it was just called Whitby Jet as the gemstone until someone said to me that's actually where it came from.
Yeah, it's still there. The town is still there. Whitby's still there, and you can still purchase jet there. It's just that during this period they were pumping it out. You know, the black jet beads and the different types of earrings that we see, the combs. Whitby jet is like so in vogue at this period of time. It's you see full lockets, you see cameos that are carved in it, you see necklaces, beads, bracelets, plaques, everything in Whitby jet. And this is all again spurred by the fashions of Queen Victoria, which, you know, I understand, but it goes on for a very, very long period. Her fashion for this period doesn't really change, but the world is still changing around her. So the other aristocrats or the other elite that are living either in the UK or in Europe at this particular time, even in Russia as well, start to travel more, and it gets a name for itself. The travel kind of route that they do becomes known as the Grand Tour. Now, I want to first say that those who are in the UK will know the travel agency Thomas Cook, right? Or even here in Ireland, I'm sure that there was...
Travel agents, more or less.
Yeah, it's similar to... Yeah, it is a travel agent. Yes, it's a travel agent. Thomas Cook himself organised the first organised trip or organised travel in 1855, and he takes his first passengers to Europe, right? So this is like, oh yeah, okay, so I'm going to make an itinerary and we're going to X, Y, Z, and then you come back to the UK and it's all kind of planned out for you. So that happens in 1855. But we then see an influx of the newer generation that go as a part of their education and as a part of their coming of age, they go on this grand tour, right? So I'm going to quickly go over what the kind of grand tour, what the stops were, just in case you want to do it yourself. But there was also the creation of souvenirs. This is where the souvenir originally comes from. It comes from the grand tour. Okay, so the grand tour begins in Dover, where you cross from the White Cliffs of Dover to either Calais in France or Ostend in Belgium. So this is by boat because you have to travel over the English Channel to either one of these two. And of course, this is all tailored to you. So you might not want to go through France. You might want to go to Belgium first, and there might be something there that you want to see. There might be a museum that you want to see. There might be something there. So it's all tailored how you want it to be. From there, from Calais or from Belgium, you would either catch a coach or a boat, depending on where you are, to Paris. And in Paris, you would have maybe fencing lessons or dancing lessons, or you would go and buy the fashions of Paris. These are things that are very, very well known. And of course, the French language. So if you wanted to improve your French language, you might stay in Paris for 3 months. You might stay in Paris for a year. You know, the Grand Tour, it can be a very long time.
It wasn't a 2-week jaunt around the place.
No. But all of the while that you're doing this, you're picking up jewelry pieces, okay, as souvenirs. Then from France, from Paris in particular, you would cross over into Switzerland, either Geneva or Lucerne. And this is where you'd go mountaineering. So you'd see the beautiful Alps. You would maybe stay for a spot of skiing or, you know, whatever.
Hiking.
Yeah, whatever you like. But this particular part of the tour, I've seen pieces from Switzerland, Geneva in particular, that are painted porcelain brooches that have like the Swiss enamel on it, which show like, you know, a beautiful kind of country scene. You'd also see, you know, Swiss enamel with people in their traditional costume and things like that would have been picked up from your time in Switzerland. And then from Switzerland, you'd cross via the Alps into Italy. And in Italy, this is where you'd probably do your longest jaunt. So you would either go to Turin, Milan, Florence, Pisa, Bologna, Venice, Rome, and Naples. And then you'd turn around and you would venture back home via all of the German-speaking areas like Vienna, Dresden, and Berlin. So that's how the Grand Tour kind of works. Now, the pieces of jewelry that you would get from there. Rome is micromosaics. So folk scenes and religious scenes that you would see in very, very small pieces of hard stone or sometimes even glass that create a picture. That's what very, very fine micromosaics. And these would be a piece that you'd pick up from Rome. You might just get the mosaic itself and then you'd take it back to the UK and have it set into a piece of jewelry, or you'd have the piece of jewelry made in Rome, depending on what you prefer. In Florence, you would get pettadura, which is an inlay of hard stones. Usually it's got like a black background with like flowers on it. And you can still go to Florence to this day and buy pettadura. So it's a historic thing from the Grand Tour, but it's also something that you can still get today. In Naples, you would get coral. So coral is super famous during the Grand period. We see it in a lot of pieces of jewelry. And one of my favorite pieces of jewelry that was created in coral is actually a tiara that was made by Robert Phillips. And we actually have a piece of Robert Phillips jewelry in the shop at the moment. But this particular coral tiara is from about 1860 to 1870, and it's actually part of the V&A collection. And it's literally kept in its kind of coral formation, and it looks like a mermaid's tiara. Like, it's amazing. But again, that would have been something that would have been made from coral from Naples. And then, of course, Pompeii, you would go to see Mount Vesuvius. And this is where you would get your lava jewels. So lava is in fact limestone, but they call it lava. So we keep that name, but it's not actually lava. It's limestone. And these are usually done with kind of carved cameos. You'll see portraits of classical figures from Greek or Roman mythology, but also you'll see just beautiful portraits carved into the lava jewels. And these can be made in pendants, brooches, and bracelets. And then lastly is Venice, where you'll get mille fiori glass, which is, again, very similar to a lot of the other kind of micro mosaics, but has a very distinctive look to it, which is very specific to Venice. And all of these items, we still see them today. So they are beloved pieces and souvenirs that were collected during the Grand Tour and would have had sentimental value. But seeing them today is like, why do we only get magnets and the Victorian
bottle openers and magnets?
Yeah, we get magnets and they get, a beautiful micro mosaic showing the Colosseum.
Alyce, I think that's a fantastic rundown for anyone who, if you're going through your jewellery box or, or things you inherited and you see those pieces that you've talked about there, it's a really good indication of when it's from and where it's from, specifically where it's from. Coral pieces, micro mosaics, pietra dura, cameos, enamels like porcelains. That really encapsulates a lot of the jewellery that you'll find from this period. I think it's a really good rundown. But if you have any of these, you can really help assess the age based on that. So
we also have to think about the reason why they go to those areas. And a lot of it has to do with the archaeological digs and ancient finds, which spurs on ancient revivals that happened during this time as well.
Yeah, I mean, at this time period, people were super interested, obsessed even with
the ancient world.
And there was lots of archaeological finds as well, which spurred this even further, which was obviously Pompeii. Everyone knows Pompeii is a famous dig, but that was obviously an important one on it. And I mean, we can talk about this revival of the kind of Etruscan style, these Etruscan cities. Like, I think it's really important that we just talk a little bit about the type of work. Now, we have an episode on it's gold work, right? It's super, it's super fine Cantil gold work, gold beading, things like that. And we do have a gold episode, which we will put in the links to this podcast, and you go back and listen to it in depth about the type of gold work that you'll find in Etruscan jewellery.
Yeah, so we have a few different revivals that happened during this time. And as Matthew has said, it literally is spurred on by things like Pompeii, where this whole world is uncovered and everybody's like, my gosh, wow, look at the things that they're finding. One of the main jewelers of the time who championed Etruscan revival in particular was Castellani Jewelers in Rome. They actually worked for the Pope, Castellani did, and he helped, his firm helped restore the Etruscan jewellery that was found in the digs. So he had first-hand knowledge of what these ancient pieces actually looked like, how they were constructed, what they were constructed of. And then he starts to create things that look like it. One of the most famous collections of ancient jewellery is the Marquise Campana collection, which had over 150 pieces of this Etruscan jewellery. And it actually went up to be purchased during the 1860s. And Napoleon III snapped it up for the Louvre. And it can still be, pieces from that particular collection can still be viewed in the Louvre. And
I think we'll have to do an episode about that, Alyce. I think a trip to the Louvre to see those would be great, because it's a really, really great collection. And what I find really cool about Castellani, Pio Castellani, and also Carlo Giuliano, who is also really famous from this time period as well. Probably they're two of the names for this Etruscan revival jewellery that you really need to know. But what was super interesting about their techniques that they use is that they're ancient gold techniques, and some of them people couldn't recreate them.
It took them a long time to master granulation. Granulation is, we won't go into it now because it's in the gold episode, but granulation is an ancient technique that they had no idea how they did it. They had to start from scratch and they had to experiment on how to achieve it. They were able to do so. Carlo Giuliano actually used to work for Castellani and then moved to London, as did part of Castellani's team as well, and started up their own shops there. And it was hugely popular. And if you look at their pieces side by side to the originals from those archaeological digs from the Etruscan revival, like the Etruscan revival pieces, there's no denying that they're nearly copies of those ancient pieces. The same techniques are used, the same richness of gold is used, and of course the same subjects are used as well. We see a lot of like the ancient gods being used in their subject matter. So it's really interesting, but it also shows like how much inspiration an archaeological find can be. And it continues with Sir Austin Henry Layard, who excavated the Assyrian reliefs in the North Palace in Nineveh. And this created a revival in the Assyrian style. And you can see some of those Assyrian pieces in the V&A, which was only really something that became in vogue in the UK. We don't see it anywhere else in the world. And that's due to Sir Austin Henry Layard's kind of prestige in the UK and nowhere else.
So if you've got something at home that's Assyrian in style, you can pretty much date it.
Yes.
From that time period, and also its location origin as well.
Yes, absolutely. Someone in the UK would have created a goldsmith from the UK. And then we have the Neo-Renaissance pieces, which actually were inspired by 16th and 17th century mounts that displayed vases in the Louvre. So there was a time in the Louvre where they're actually redoing part of the Louvre, and these particular holders that held vases from the 16th and 17th century were displayed prominently, and goldsmiths came and viewed them. And then they started making jewels in the same style. And this is where we get Neo-Renaissance from. Specifically from a Maurice, which was one of the most favoured French jewellers of Queen Victoria, created. And now when we talk about Neo-Renaissance jewellery, it's super fussy. It's like really, really over the top. We've seen a piece before together, Matthew, actually from the Arts Décoratifs Museum in Paris that had the name Diana written on it. Do you remember that piece?
Yes, I do indeed, yeah.
It's a bracelet. It was a bracelet. This was actually created from a Maurice, and the bracelet is so, it looks like almost like a miniature altar that you might see in a like Russian Orthodox church, like that kind of level of detail. Lots of scroll work. In between the scroll work, we have like open florets and folate motifs. And then we have a portrait in the center of it, of the side view of a woman that's painted in enamel, and then below it has a plaque that says Diana. And this particular piece is quintessential neo-Renaissance. Actually, that particular bracelet is by Alfonso Fouquet. But when I'm talking about the sections of this particular item for neo-Renaissance, it's like the perfect thing. It's the perfect example to look at for this kind of revival. And to think that all of that started from viewing a few vase holders in the Louvre is quite incredible.
Yeah, I mean, some of the archaeological digs and finds that inspired the jewellery of this time period are so fundamental to it. But there were some other interesting finds that were really important for this time period, and again will really help you date your jewellery if you see some of these. So firstly, we could not possibly mention the Grand Period and not mention the fact that while there were diamonds before this, a large supply of diamonds in South Africa was found in 1867, which obviously was just a few years into this time period. So prior to this, and again, we have our diamond episode done before, right? But there was Brazilian and Indian ones, but this supply in South Africa made diamonds more available to more people, and it really influenced the type of jewellery. So you'll see much more diamond jewellery hitting the market, obviously to do with the manufacturing and the creation of these pieces as well. It's done on a larger scale. So not only is there more diamonds, but there's also more people producing jewellery, and advances in the cutting of diamonds as well. There was mechanized bruting machines, which is basically a machine that rubs two diamonds against each other in a circular fashion, which gives them a perfectly circular edge. So you'll start to really see round diamonds at this time. Not completely, because you still have the old mine cuts and the old cushion cuts, but diamonds found in South Africa was fundamental. Secondly, there was a discovery of silver, a very significant discovery of silver at this time in Nevada, Virginia City in Nevada in the 1860s, which, I mean, I've been to Nevada once or twice. It's still pretty remote. I can only imagine, it was in the middle of the desert completely. It would have taken a very long time to get there. Probably horseback, I'd imagine, possibly a train, but
definitely horseback in those days, I'd say, is the only way.
To there, yeah, it must have been. And silver, it was very fashionable during this time. Big necklaces, silver collars, lockets, hand engraved, engine turned. Interestingly as well, in relation to the diamonds were typically set in this time period with cut down silver settings. So for anyone, if you have a diamond ring in your hand at the moment, you look down, you'll see it's probably got, although I know we've got a lot of antique jewellery enthusiasts here, so this might not be accurate, but a lot of people who look at their hands will see little prongs or fingers or claws holding the diamonds in place. But if you get jewellery from the 1860s, 1870s, often it'll be cut down silver settings, or what some people call pie dish silver settings, which can have gold at the back of them then, but the part holding the diamonds would be silver. So you get these silver lockets, silver necklaces, but also cut down silver settings. Another key discovery, which is pretty close to home for you, Alyce, although Australia is a big place. Opals were found in Australia in 1870. A major discovery was found in 1870. Queen Victoria absolutely loved opals as well. So this discovery, along with her interest in them, would mean that a lot of Victorian opal jewellery can come from kind of 1870 onwards, which again is bang in the middle of the Grand Period. So we've got a lot of, as you mentioned, archaeological digs and finds which inspired the design, but also find new, and it's all finds in new materials of diamonds, opals and silver, which again, I suppose, probably goes back to the fact that people are traveling, exploring.
And also trying to find their fortunes, because we know just prior to 1860, there's a lot of gold rushes that are happening, like specifically in California and Australia. We have gold rushes that are happening in like the late 1840s and the early 1850s. So those gold rushes as well is spurring other people to go on and find their own fortunes and are finding other materials like diamonds and opals.
Some other key things just to remember quickly on this time period, in terms of helping you date your jewellery. The Suez Canal opened, so there's east meets west. So, the trade that was coming greatly increased. So you get like Japonisme influences coming into it. And actually, we just attended a Van Cleef & Arpels exposition on their Japanese influence, which will be coming up in a future episode very soon.
But also the Suez Canal was, of course, in Egypt. And this spurred on an Egyptian revival as well. So a lot of people think when they get Egyptian pieces that they're specifically from the 1920s. They can actually, depending on the way in which the Egyptian revivalist piece looks, it can be earlier. It can be from the Grand Period as well, because the Suez Canal did, in fact, spur on Egypt mania as well.
You'll also, the use of materials like tortoise shell was at its peak during this time period. Inlaid gemstones, so often you can see like, one that I've seen would be like amethyst inlaid with little diamonds.
They weren't really too concerned about the future of the species of animals either. We see tiger claws, we see
hummingbird
heads, we see and a lot of this will be covered in our episode of taxidermy. So it talks a little bit about it there, but the Victorian period was, I own everything, opulence. So it's like whatever goes really. The natural world will provide forever is their kind of thought pattern during the Victorian era.
And at that time, a lot of it was abundant, which is obviously now not so much. And the last thing I'd say that would, if I was, looking at my collection and seeing what's what, the other thing that emerged at this time period is really on a larger scale would be costume jewellery. So we're going to wrap it up there on the grand period of the Victorian era. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, we have notes on what we spoke about with links and anything else you might need in the description area of this podcast. My thanks to my trusty co-host, Alyce Ketcher. Thank you, Alyce.
Thanks, everyone.
And our podcast producer, dustpod.io, and our researcher, Veronique Gauguin. Until next time, from me, Matthew Weldon, chat to you very, very soon.